my name is Mary Ellen King, President of the Austin Bar Association. Thank you for joining another episode of the Stop the Stigma podcast, an initiative of the Austin Bar Association to change the conversation and reduce the stigma around discussions of mental health, substance abuse, and suicide. Today, we have two guests, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are.
My name is David Courreges. I am the General Counsel at the University Federal Credit Union here in Austin. I'm originally from China Spring, Texas, which is northwest of Waco, and I volunteered with the bar for a few years.
I'm Katy Sutton. I'm a licensed psychologist, also a licensed specialist in school psychology, born and raised in Waco, Texas, but primary resident of Houston now, and I've known David here for 40 years.
You know, when we made a call for people to reach out to us and help us tell stories so that we can stop the stigma and change the conversation around saying you're not alone and there's help, you reached out to me, David, and said you would love to be on the podcast and talk to us. Can you tell me a little bit more about what made you do that and just generally kind of what your journey has been?
Absolutely. A lot of it was for you because I know this is very important to you, and it's also very important to me. The reason it's important to me is mental health in general has been a lifelong journey of mine, and I didn't know it. When I was 5 years old, I grew up in Waco. Baylor University was instituting a pilot program to learn more about ADHD or hyperactivity, as it was called back then. In my entire kindergarten class at Columbus Avenue, I didn't go to St. Paul's for kindergarten, but went to visit Baylor University specifically so that the students there could study me. I didn't know it. I just thought it was cool that we were at a university. And that day I was diagnosed with hyperactivity. And since that day, I have been on some type of medication. And every day I've learned more and more about it. I'm a lay expert at this point. And the reason I asked Katy to join us is Katy has been with me on that journey the entire time and has her own journey that I asked if she would mind sharing that really relates to mine, but in a completely different way at the same time.
Yeah. Interesting. Katy, we talked before we went on camera and said that you're not here in your capacity as a treating therapist of David. You're here as a friend, right? And a colleague of someone who understands his story and walked alongside him. So I just want to make that clear because, you know, it's very important for me and people listening to understand that you have the same sort of confidentiality rules that apply to lawyers. And if you ask for help or need help, you're certainly not going to get on a podcast and tell people's stories.
Certainly will not. Certainly
Okay.
will not. But no, he has never been my patient. Always
Yeah.
just a really good friend.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about your story and kind of what he's, I guess, foreshadowing without telling us your story for you?
Yeah, I have known David since I was very young. And like he mentioned, we didn't really know much about what we did call hyperactivity back then. And sort of as a professional now, I understand all the components of it, and it can be much more than just hyperactivity. But like he said, was along for the journey. Adolescence is a rough ride for most of us anyway. But just got to watch him struggle with a lot of things. And that was hard for me to watch a lot of times. But and then later in my life, not during early school, but in college, I actually was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. It's ADHD, but all called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But I did not have any of the H. In fact, it was the opposite, but just the inattentive type. And so then, learning how to handle that career and different things like that. So, and now we're just really good friends with.
Good. Well, thank you both for being here. This is one thing we've learned with everybody that's been on the podcast to date is, and what I heard you both saying when you were talking is you sort of have the same diagnosis, but your journey is different, right? Not everybody looks the same. If you have depression, it may not be the same as your neighbor who has depression. Or if you have substance abuse issues, it may not be the same as someone in your office that has substance abuse issues. And if you have ADHD, it may not look the same as someone else who has ADHD. So thank you for being here and discussing that. There's two things I want to mention. It was interesting in the last 24 hours, and I sometimes think it's so serendipitous the way this happens, but I was having a discussion with another parent whose child is about to be diagnosed with ADHD last night. And this child's in the fourth grade. My son's in the fourth grade. My son has ADHD. So I'm also familiar with your topic. Um, and he said, the thing that happens to young children is especially when they have the hyperactivity component of it, is the social stigma, the behavior child, the outcast, and I've seen it in my own life with my son where, before he was able to be counseled and get onto medication, we really struggled with that. And so is that what you're talking about a little bit?
A little bit. So when I was growing up, and I wish he could have joined us today, but we also went to grade school with a fellow Austin lawyer, Ryan Squires, one of my other two lifelong best friends, and Ryan and the rest of my friends at the time, when I would get a little bit rambunctious, would say, "Dave, it's time to take your medicine. It's time to take your medicine." It just, and that became ultimately it. I know it was meant to be funny, and Ryan knows this, but you start to internalize this. By the time that I got into high school, I heard it so often from so many different people. By that time, Katy, Ryan, and my really close friends were very supportive and knew. But in Waco, junior high is seventh grade, not sixth grade like Austin. So we got into seventh grade, and all of a sudden there was an influx of new kids that weren't used to me. And they started to pick it up. It's time to take your medicine. Oh, he's so annoying. And in junior high, you're
Vulnerable.
very vulnerable. So I stopped taking my medication, and my grades dropped dramatically. Ultimately, to the point that I got kicked out of school. And I wasn't telling my mom because it was so embarrassing, and as far as what the other kids were saying and doing. What I also didn't know at the time was that similar to Katie, I was in college. I learned that I had 18 learning disabilities that were never diagnosed. Among those are dyslexia and several others. I always wondered why I could not speak Spanish, and I know why now. Um, but that was some of the journey that I dealt with, and we'll say Katie along the way, she was destined to be what she is today professionally because she was always there and very supportive. And um, you know, I've told her many times, especially recently, she really did good when she was young for at least one person.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, to speak to your point, hopefully we do a better job now. We don't do perfect job, I think, in acknowledging how much disability can affect behavior. But when we were little, oh, I'm gonna like tear up, but it used to just crush me because there was a lot of shame assigned with discipline in the school system. So it wasn't just that you had to be redirected, but you had to go put your name on the board, and the board was in the middle of this huge area with maybe I don't know 70 students, and so it was like the walk of shame, and then however many times you had to go up during the day. And it broke my heart because you were treated like you were like bad, and it
Right. And we would get a movie. What was it? Every month we would get a movie. And if you had fewer than, I think it was 3 stars, you get to do the movie. I was routinely the only one that never got. I never saw the movie.
Wow.
We were there 6 years. Not one time did I ever get to see
That's
it.
just another like, almost a shame technique of look at the kid in the corner who doesn't get to come because he is, misbehaves or
I do think, I think the schools do a better job now. We certainly have a lot more education in the schools, and especially, obviously the well funded schools tend to do it a little bit better than others. But I think, too, you still have this situation where the general public still subscribes to this stigmatized and don't want to admit that something's wrong. And I'm never going to tell anybody anything's wrong with my child, but look at that child, acting out. I mean, I see that a lot just having raised 4 kids. And so, just one thing I hope that we can do through that is just raise awareness to the general public that, and I've probably said Brene Brown's name every single podcast. But I mean, I have read every single book. Like every time I heard her name said, it's like angelic sounds in my ear because I just love her and adore her. But the one thing she says is what people don't need is shame for when they're going through their hard times. And that was a really hard time for you, right? And that shame just it rewires, I think, in a lot of ways that you end up not being able to process and maybe going to substances and doing all sorts of other things. Well, David, I want to ask a question about so you were diagnosed and then talk to me. You said in middle school you stopped taking your medicine. You got kicked out of school. So then what was the next progression there? Obviously at some point somebody figured out you weren't taking your medicine.
So I went from a school, and truth be told, I got kicked out for fighting. I was very angry. Um, you know, I am not shy about it. My parents got divorced when I was 3. I haven't seen my father since I was 10. He was very abusive when they were together. He was an alcoholic. He has since cleaned up his life. He lives here in Austin. I still, from the trauma I experienced, want nothing to do with him. And that's unfortunate for me. My daughter's never met her grandfather. My wife's never met her father-in-law. Um, but the memories aren't good. And it really, as I've gotten older, I've learned that ADHD and many learning disabilities are a result of trauma and it's a depression response. And that's why I had it when I was so young. I mean, it was not a good thing. Um, so, you know, flash forward, you have people, making fun of the fact that only child with a single mother. I was on full scholarship at that school. It is all of that combined. I mean, if you said a sideways word about my mom, whether they were kidding or not, you were going down. And I was also the smallest kid in school. But I grew up on a farm. I could lift hay bales, 2 at a time by the time I was 8. And I was much stronger than a kid my size should have been. Um, and ninth grade, the wrong kid picked on me. He was the son of one of my teachers who promptly made sure I didn't come back. So I went to a public school, China Spring High School, go Cougars. So when I started, we didn't have really AP or honors classes. It was just straight up school. And most of the classes I took there, I took in 7th and 8th grade at Vanguard. Matter of fact, I didn't take my first new class till my senior year. So I was able, long-winded story, to mask it because I had already done it. And, I wasn't in the top 10, but I wasn't in the bottom 10. It was enough to go to UT. So, but it wasn't until I went to UT that, and, was making C's all of a sudden. And biology, I was in freshman biology, one of those 300 people classes, and I was struggling so hard that I went to the professor and he started coaching me and verbally giving me exams or helping me prepare for them, and I'd still fail them. Pull me aside and say, Have you ever been tested for anything?" Like, well, yeah. He goes, "You need to go to the student center, go get tested, and you're dropping my class." I went to student center, got tested, and that's where I learned I had the learning disabilities. Got back on my medication, and from that point on, I never made really below a B plus. Mostly A's. It was life changing. because I finally owned up to the fact that there's nothing really wrong with me. Um, it was I needed to figure out what worked best for me and take advantage of the opportunities that modern medicine has given us and research has given us, and did that to the fullest.
One of my favorite things a podcaster or a podcast guest has told me is, we need to stop this conversation about ADHD medicine or depression medication or bipolar, any of the medication. Let's just stop the discussion of not of acting like there's a problem with taking it, and let's treat it like allergy medication. I'm having a bad day or I'm going through a messy middle right now. I need to just step back or I need to take my medicine because so many people are like you and like me, and have been down this journey. And then the one thing I did here too is I appreciate you saying this is, as you know, we are here doing this because my ex-husband and the father of my son was an alcoholic and passed away in November. So the one thing I'll say is incredible the effect trauma has on a child, and it does. It's just it mirrors ADHD, it's anxiety. I mean, it's all these terrible things, and it back goes. It's just a child. You didn't ask for that. He didn't ask for that. It's just what they're given. And so I tell people all the time. I love the story about your professor, in his life, whether it be a coach or a teacher or whatever, you have a choice. You can do something that sends him to the next level, or you can do something that takes him down. You're so fortunate that you had a college professor that did that. What were you about to say, Katie?
Yeah, I really want to plug
Yeah.
the testing and assessment piece, and especially what you both said about trauma. So that's trauma has actually become my area of specialty. I do a lot of expert work and testify a lot about trauma. But it can show up as the same thing in children, or even in adulthood, really. But part of what I used to do is differential diagnosis and testing, and I still do a little bit of that on the private side of things. But if you diagnose someone just based on behaviors, you might get it right, but you also might not get it right. So sometimes kids with anxiety issues, they're hyper because they're nervous and they're afraid. So if you just give a child like that a stimulant medication, a lot of them I've seen really come unglued because the anxiety just gets ramped up when it's not, rooted in brain-based ADHD. Another reason why you were able to mask, and you may not admit this, but he's incredibly intelligent. And people with high IQ um, come up, not really intentionally, but just come up with all these different ways to cope and compensate. And so, they can sort of coast through, but until I call it hitting your wall, and everybody's wall's at a different place.
Or your bottom, whatever it is.
Yeah, it can come right along with your bottom. So yeah, I think the testing and assessment piece is super important, but also just the recognition that we don't do a good enough job of considering trauma in diagnosis and in just the overall picture of people's lives, whether you're a kid or an adult.
Right. And the people sometimes think like trauma has to be something drastic, like, for example, my son's father dying, but really divorce was very traumatic for him. No, I mean, I say all the time, I did not get married with the intention to get divorced. I did not have kids with my kids intending them to live in a family that was divorced. But, life happens, and that was traumatic for them, and you really have to be proactive in helping them process it because even as adults, we don't process things well, and they're kids and, they really don't know how to do anything. So that's real interesting. Well, talk to me a little bit, Katie, about once you figured out, or talk to me about how you discovered you had the ADHD or ADD. You had ADD.
Um, so I was able to do, fairly well in our school, college preparatory school, but I did notice that it took me longer to study, and I felt like I spent a lot more time than other people did, having to complete things and write papers, especially. But I just was sort of a pleaser, not just sort of, I was absolutely a pleaser. Wouldn't dare not make a good grade, not because my parents were that way, but it just meant a lot to me. So I just worked really hard and continued to do well. My freshman year of college was hit me like a freight train. I was able to test out of almost almost my whole first year of classes just with AP stuff, but college was hard for me. Um, and I worked just as hard as I did in high school, but it wasn't, enough looking back to compensate for that. But the harder I tried, and the less well I did, the more I just started to think that I was just, I made it about me. That I wasn't smart enough, that I was lazy, that I'm just disorganized, or that I'm not, trying hard enough. All these things that you tell yourself.
That little voice.
Yes, yes. And I also had this feeling like I swear I'm smart. Like, like this grade doesn't reflect how bright I feel like I'm smarter than what these grades show. And so I took a semester off, kind of worked, and there's nothing like just sort of working for minimum wage back when I was 19 to be like I'm going back to school because this is hard too. And so at UT Arlington, I finally, it was one of my professors too, said, hey, you ever thought about it? And there was a stigma then, and there's still a stigma now, but I didn't even tell my parents,
Really?
right? Because I just heard in passing, some of their thoughts about it and medication, and there certainly was an overdiagnosis at this one point where I feel like they were just, over medicating kids who really didn't even need it. And I definitely don't support that. But I was tested and was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And I started crying. I started crying when they told me because it was almost a relief
Yeah.
for somebody to go, you know what, that's a thing. That's a thing.
And all the negative self talk is
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. And the first day that I took ADHD medication, it was Ritalin at the time, it was a whole new world. It was like somebody had just reached into my brain and taken all the clouds out. And I just thought, is this what everybody else walks around like every day? Like I finished my work in class. I could pay attention the whole time. I took a whole page of notes and I didn't doodle or draw a single cartoon on the bottom. But it was absolutely life changing for me. And I don't think I would have made it through college, much less, get a doctorate without, the use of medication. I know I wouldn't have.
The other thing I said there's two things I want to tell y'all about happened to me in the last 24 hours. I was sitting there working yesterday or last night, and somebody texted me that I know that has several neurodivergent diagnoses, right? And they are a lawyer, and they said, um, I really think you should address how it affects people in the legal profession because sometimes it's kind of like what I say with substance abuse too. The message I want to give is when someone's not coming to work, or they're not answering their telephone calls, or they're not answering emails, or they're generally not getting things done, the first line of defense should not be fire them. It should be, are you okay? Is everything okay? Like, how can I help you? Just that human conversation of you're not your regular self opens the door for them to have a conversation. And the same is true for ADHD. Like you said, until you had medicine, you were in a fog. I mean, you didn't know how to do the next step. So what would you say to somebody? Two things. What would you say to somebody that is practicing law that has ADHD or any other type of disability diagnosis that's struggling in the legal profession? And then for you, Katie, I want you to, if you don't mind, be thinking about what would we tell the law firms and the bosses how to address these people in a way that is best for them and the employee, or an attorney, and the client. So, David, we'll start with you.
So I would say one of my recent experiences is this: is you know what you have, but sometimes it still sneaks up on you, or even you don't know what you have, and times and scenarios change. I mean, we could not have predicted the pandemic, obviously, nor the hardships that it is still creating. I know from my own research, insurance wise, that pre-pandemic dependent insurance for mental health was 10 or 11th on the list as far as expense goes on company insurance plans. It's now number one times two. And what that tells you is, one, there's a whole generation that has been affected by this. But two, the parents of those generations are also dealing with it. And there is nothing more heartbreaking or stressing than seeing your own child go through anything. And it doesn't matter what it is. So, especially if you're a parent, grandparent, or, just know a kid, you have to realize that others do affect you, especially those that are, the neurodivergence, or those that have disabilities that they have grown accustomed to. You now have to grow accustomed to them in a different way. In my case, I was noticing, late last year, I was just in a bad mood. I never been in a bad mood before, and every once in a while, everybody is, but just constantly. And realized, through I was spending all my time worrying and helping others, not worrying and helping myself. And part of the thing about being a lifer on Adderall and Ritalin, um, and you have to visit a psychiatrist to get your medication for Texas law, um, or a doctor. But my doctor, I'm at levels that he doesn't feel comfortable working with. Honestly, I've been working with a psychiatrist for 10 years. Our meetings are, how's everything going? Great. Anything bad going on? No, everything's great. Here you go. All of a sudden, she said, how's work going? I was like, it's fine, but I can't organize anymore. I'm just having trouble thinking. I haven't had this problem, and my medication. I don't think my medication is working. Problem is, I can't go any higher because it'll hurt my heart, literally. And I kind of like my heart. She said, it's not your medication. I was like, what is it? It's anxiety. What do you mean it's anxiety? I'm not anxious. Yeah, you are. And you need to do something about it. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse. So we developed a plan. And part of that plan, believe it or not, was she asked me what I did as a kid to relax. And what I did as a kid to relax was rifle through baseball cards. When I feel myself get anxious now, I am, to my wife's and daughter's dismay, I'll stop by Target, Walmart, or wherever I know has a box of baseball cards. I'll pick them up, open it up, and it's cathartic and recenters me, gives me something to focus on that's not my phone. Yeah. It's my thing again 30 years later.
That's not just about ADHD. That is a self-care mechanism that the world needs to embrace more. Because I've heard it for every person that's been in here. We've heard it from the Christie Center, from someone that has depression, from people that have substance abuse issues. And I suffer from anxiety myself, medicated. And I have a couple of things I like to do. I love to nap. I, I love books. I love to put a book on tape, and I love to listen to Audible, because then that makes me put my phone down, and I can't sit there and play with my phone, and I have to focus. I love to take walks with my dogs, and so you need to find what that, and I love to go to church. That's my thing. So you need to find what centers you and recognize that, and learning how to recognize there's extreme power in learning how to recognize when you're off balance, and it happens to everybody. I mean, if somebody says they never get off center, they're lying. I mean, there's things in life that just throw us off. And so I just love that. And Wyatt's thing is drawing, and he loves to art, he loves to draw, and we have, stuff out all the time. He has it in his classroom, and that's the way he gets back to center. So it's really important for everybody to recognize, what is it? What's your tool in your toolbox?
You bring up an important point,
Yeah.
which is just, I think, the culture that surrounds the expectations of certain professions. Um, and really, this is somewhat unique to American culture. It's not the case in Latin American culture and other countries. But, if you're not working, even if it's outside of your 8-hour workday, you should be working and you should be always reachable. And kind of these mental health breaks, it's like an eye roll thing still. I think people can say out loud, sure, we want you to, take good care of yourself. Oh my God, they're, taking half the day off to go walk in the mountain with their dog,
Or take a nap.
Yeah,
They're
and that's
tired.
not
They just
lazy.
need to take a nap,
It's not lazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you asked earlier, like what kinds of things, would I suggest when it comes to that? I mean, I think a little bit of it comes really from the way that we're trained in these competitive fields. So that starts for you guys in law school or in med school or, in doctoral programs where if it's competitive, you're not going to show weakness because somebody's going to exploit it and take advantage of it. And so part of that really gets ingrained in us, I think, in our training. And even this may not be a fair statement, David, but I think even maybe even more so for women in professions that are predominantly male.
Like the legal profession. Although
like
we're working on it.
Yes, well, yeah. And like I said, that's the majority of my work now is in the legal side of things. And so if I show up for a deposition, I'm not wanting to look weak, And so I think that's part of it. I think it starts out just with the institutions really starting to maybe operate in a little bit different way or support those things more. Um, the other thing I think is that, even our professional licensing boards, is in the field of psychology, and I would assume you guys have this too, is, part of the, ethical or rules of practice are that if you are incompetent or incapacitated or you have some kind of an issue that prevents you from being able to practice, um, and somebody finds, that you have one of those issues, then, you can get a complaint filed against you for that. So I think the tendency to want to hide or, mask it or fake it or keep working hard to overcome it. If I can just keep trying hard enough, it'll get better. I think we even need to be real supportive of that. If you call into the state bar and you say, look, I haven't, made any mistakes, but I'm just letting you know that I'm taking a break. I want it documented in case somebody files a complaint. But I don't think anybody feels safe doing that.
Well, actually, I do want to say that we do have a mechanism available for that. It's called TLAP, Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. It's through the state bar. They have licensed professional therapists who are also juris doctors, so lawyers who receive calls. And then they can refer you to another lawyer. Everything's 100% confidential. One thing you can also do is say, for example, if David and I were colleagues and he stopped coming to work and stopped answering his emails, I could call them and say, hey, confidentially, I'm worried about my colleague. I don't know how to approach him, but I know that y'all are professionals and can. So you can call TLAP Helps and they can help guide you through that process. And we do have that. And they will help you through your grievances and everything else, but you have to ask for help, which is why we're here to say it's okay. There are safety nets all around you. This entire profession is built around service and people wanting to help one another. And we catch each other when they're falling down, but you got to tell us you're falling, because if you don't, it will spiral out of control.
And you mentioned, if you went to Dave and said, David, I'm worried about you. I don't think that we always do a really good job of self-awareness. Even, even as a professional, like when you mentioned, developing anxiety or, I developed depression, and I certainly know a lot about depression. I talk about depression, and, but I didn't recognize it in myself. Um, Even though it was really becoming a prominent issue. And so I think it's really important that you have, even if it's just one person that you trust their opinion. You don't think they're out to get you. But that you kind of make it official and just be like, look, you're going to be my one person. And if there's ever anything that you see and you're worried about me, I want you to tell me, even if you think it's hard. And even if you think it's going to hurt my feelings, and maybe it will hurt my feelings.
I'll
But
get over it though.
yeah, but I'm going to trust you to be that person.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I just think we don't always really do a great job of being aware.
It's true. And uh, we're so used to saying, "Hey, David, how are you doing?" Great. I mean, great's always the answer, even though like I'm feeling like absolute crap today. I don't know why I left the house.
Yeah. Have you ever done that when people ask you, or like the girl at the checkout line at the grocery store, and you'd be like, you know what? It's actually a really bad day. People are, oh, and nobody knows what to do with that now. It just becomes awkward. But yeah, it's just, yeah, fine. It just becomes a reply that doesn't really mean anything.
So, but when you do find that person, and I'm lucky to have several of those people, and I've confided in both of you at some point in my life. Um, y- y- People that don't know it kind of need. I suggest warning them, because those conversations can be awkward. Um, the bewilderment on their face when you say something that they're just not expecting. Or like, I did not know we were that close, but
Thanks for letting me know.
yeah, it's been a while since that's happened, but yeah, I remember it being very awkward when you're a little bit you share a little bit too much about the interpersonal nature of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. You can't, I've talked about this multiple times, and we talked about this a little bit before we started, right? Is it, and then when I tell my story, I say, the story's long and it's, oh, what's the phrase I use? Anyways, it's messy and terrible, full of gory details. And I don't really need to tell you that to get my point across. You know what I mean? So I don't, but there are people that I will share that with. I went to the mountains with my first cousins on my dad's side, all the females this past summer, and we sat down and told our stories. And there was a lot more details that went into that with me telling because they're safe, right? And so I think it's important to what you're saying is find your safe people,
Right.
and know who you can trust,
Right.
and they're not gonna. Your safe people are not ever going to violate you, or I mean, they 100% are out for your best interest always. And those people are everywhere. Sometimes if we are not vulnerable, we may not recognize them, but they're surrounding us.
Yeah.
The one thing, Katie, I thought about, have you read the book Never Enough?
I don't think I have.
Okay. So you were talking about achievement culture in a way, like the legal profession. And then you said y'all went to a college prep school in Waco and talked about how everybody there was so smart. Well, so I'm in a school district with my son, whereas you might be top 15. I believe we might be the number one school district in the state. And so the district recommended this for all the administrators, this book. And then it somehow trickled down to one of my book clubs. And what it says is that really we have started putting achievements on children at such a young age that it is creating an entire population of people who are obviously better resourced, should not be, they don't have economic disparity concerns, anything like that. They just have pressure concerns. And it's like they're in a pressure cooker to be top of the class, to be first chair in band, to be, the quarterback or whatever, to be with National Merit Scholars or to be a NASA, and they're just kids. They're, they're like 10 or 11. And so the book is so interesting, and I'm in the middle of reading it now. But, I think it starts before college. And I've tried to just say, I've really taken it to heart, and making sure that my son understands that I love him no matter what. I don't care if he makes a C or a D or A. I really would like for him to make A's, and I at least want to put him the effort. But if he gives it his best effort and makes a C, I love him. I don't care. It's not about performance. I mean, unconditional love is unconditional love, and kids need to know that so they don't feel like they have to perform to get the love.
And I think sometimes you can say that to kids, but there are just some kids who were built
Yeah.
to drive themselves for whatever reason. Um, and I think on the one hand, parenting one of those kids, you're like, oh my God, it's fantastic. I never have to do anything. She works hard and never have to say anything. But really, with that kind of a child, parenting that kind of a child, you have to do the opposite. And if you have more than one kid in your family, and
Sure.
maybe one you have to encourage, and one, and the other one you have to say, look, we're not gonna study today, and that feels, kind of wild as a parent. But different kids need different things. And I really do agree with what you're saying. I think it's not just academics. I think it's sports too. I mean, no longer can you just play little league baseball, through high school and then expect to have any kind of a future. You have to be in private pitching lessons when you're 9. We've kind of become like this really revved up, super powered culture, and we create burnout, physical, emotional.
And we're creating these issues that we're here talking about, right? And then we have this culture that doesn't really want to talk about it. It's like the perfect disaster.
It is.
Which
It's a
is
perfect storm. It is the
exactly.
perfect storm.
Which is why, I want to change the narrative around the discussion of, if we can't really, I think it'd be good to take, like you said earlier, change the holistic approach, to talk to the schools about it. But if we can't do that, let's at least make it to when they do burn out or when they do have a bad time or hard time or they are feeling vulnerable that they can say, I need help.
And I think too, we're starting to, maybe we're going back in the other direction, but I think we've adopted this idea that somehow, every child is meant to go on to college and to graduate school and then go into these, highly intellectual professions. And we've really stopped paying attention to things like technical training, or like not every child, needs to, or we shouldn't force everybody into this funnel. There are a lot of people who do incredibly well in life who never step foot in a college classroom, but we don't nurture that as much.
Right.
My high school counselor at China Spring, junior year, busts out the TSTC guide, and said, "I think you would be really good at air conditioner repair." And my mom said, "I did not send him to a college prep school to go be an air conditioner repairman. I guarantee you, I'd have way more money today than I."
You
But
probably
Amen.
would, yes, and a lot
it's
less stress.
that's
Probably,
right.
maybe.
If there's one thing you could share with a lawyer or even a non lawyer who's listening to this, who may be struggling with ADHD, learning disabilities, or just general overall mental health issues, what's one thing you would tell them?
It's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to talk about it. I feel that I overshare quite often, but I never feel bad about it. Um, the only way that people can understand you and truly understand you is if they know you, and they're not going to know you if you're not talking. Um, and as you've pointed out, reach out when you see somebody that's struggling. Um, reach out. Um, you never know when somebody needs you. You never know when somebody's alone. They could be surrounded by people, but the moment they go home, you know, they're alone. Um, so it's very important in our profession. With the high amount of alcoholism, the high amount of suicide rate, the depression. We're taking on the problems of others. Similar to Katie's profession, we all day hear the worst case scenario, and um, you've got to take care of yourself, but you also need to make sure others are taking care of themselves as well.
I love that, David. What about you, Katie? What would you say to someone that's really struggling and afraid, maybe even afraid to ask for help?
I think for me, it probably boils down to find your people or find your person. I mean, not everybody needs people. I mean, I could say for one, I'm good with just a real tight circle. But it doesn't matter who you are, truly. We all do need at least, one person in our life, even if you're that person who's like the rescuer for everybody else, professionally or, personally. And you just like to always be the one that's got all your stuff together. But I heard something a few years ago, and it was about letting people help you. Um, and we see that as a weakness sometimes, and we always want to say we don't need help. But it's actually, it was about the benefit that the other person experiences from being able to help you, and that's also a meaningful part of relationship. And so, yeah, it feels great to always be the helper, but in a way, you kind of rob the people around you from experiencing that same feeling if you're constantly like, nope, got it. Nope, I got it. Nope, I got it. Um, so it's an important part, of relationships, but find your people, even if it's just one person, um, and kind of, trust them, check in with them, and even put it on your calendar like once a month. You got to sit down face to face and actually look at each other and
Especially
talk.
now with social media and Zoom and
Oh
everything
yeah, I
else.
do depositions over Zoom all the time now, more than I do in person. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, thank you so much. The other thing I want to say is TLAP and the Mac Kid Fund offer financial assistance to anyone looking for help. So, to the extent that you're in a crisis and you do not have the resources to hire someone like Katy or to get the help that we've been talking about today, please don't let that be a barrier. Reach out to the Austin Bar or reach out to the Texas State Bar and we can help. Thank you both for coming to join us. It was a pleasure just sitting down and getting to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.